Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. This is our interview today. We're going to give focus on what's now happening in Middle East, or what's happening in the region, especially on Palestine and Gaza, what's happening on the ground, and what are the challenges faced by international organizations in order for them to alleviate the suffering of those who are engaged in prolonged war. And today we have a very special guest, belongs to one of the United Nations agency. With us today is Ms. Natalie Boucly, yes. Which is the Deputy Commissioner General, Program and Partnership of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
The name itself is quite popular among Malaysians since the war on 7th of October. But among the challenges is for people to understand what does UNRWA do. The things that we are reporting is much that UNRWA is giving food, giving humanitarian aid, trying to get as much as aid into Gaza. Maybe we can start with what actually do UNRWA do.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. So UNRWA, which is the United Nations Agency for Palestine Refugees, it's a long name and we often shorten it to the United Nations Agency for Palestine Refugees, was set up in the aftermath of the Israeli-Palestinian war in 1948. And initially, UNRWA was set up to provide humanitarian assistance to refugees who had fled from their home or were forcibly displaced. At the time, the member states, but also the Palestinians, thought that this was a temporary measure and that the refugees would go back to their homes. They had fled to neighboring countries, to Transjordan, to Lebanon, to Syria. Unfortunately, the situation has lasted now more than 75 years or 80 years. And so across the years, UNRWA then developed, became more of a development agency and was not so much of a humanitarian aid agency, but started to provide basic services to the population. So the core mandate of UNRWA is one of providing direct basic services in terms of education, health, social relief and social services, solid waste management and disposal, microfinance loan to the population, a bit like a state. And these basic services are more of a development kind than humanitarian. Now, you mentioned the situation in Gaza and the humanitarian assistance that UNRWA is able to provide. And yes, of course, since the 7th of October, UNRWA having a large footprint in all of these, in the occupied Palestinian territory and Gaza in particular, with 12,000 employees, a large footprint all in the region, the premises, the wherewithal, the community acceptance, the networks, we stepped up again and provided food and other types of supplies. But now with the blockade of the Israelis since the 2nd of March, it's been very difficult to bring in supply-driven assistance, but we continue to work with our core mandate, which is to provide whatever we can, but essentially basic health services to this population, very rudimentary educational services, and of course still the solid waste management, the WASH, which is the clean water, and the solid waste management.
Then in current situation, almost 2 million Palestinians in Gaza alone is displaced, and I think a lot of facility which is funded by UNRWA now damaged because of the attacks by the Israeli forces. So how does UNRWA operates now? Because you said just now it's not just about food aid, it's about education, it's about sanitary. Does all of those facilities still in working?
Yeah, so most of our, we had about 300 installations or facilities in Gaza, and most of them have been damaged, if not destroyed. For example, we operated 22 primary health centers, like clinics. 6 of them are still functioning. But what we did is set up mobile health teams. So we set up to 90 mobile health teams, because we've got about 1,000 health professionals in Gaza still working. They are nurses, they are doctors, and given that most hospitals have been destroyed or are barely functioning for those who remain, the type of healthcare that we provide is critical for people. There's no safe place in Gaza. I mean, basically every 48 hours an UNRWA employee gets killed at the moment. This is the situation. And notwithstanding that situation, we've got at least 10,000 employees there who are still working, have been repurposed in some way. If formal education cannot be provided because our 183 schools cannot function in the state of war, then it's informal education, just getting the children to play, to think about something else than just the bombs, or to manage the shelters. We have over 100 shelters with the IDPs in them. So staff have been repurposed in a way to lend a hand to the situation with psychosocial support also to the kids, but the health part and the management of the waste, the clean water, the psychosocial support that we can provide is priceless. And these are basic services that nobody else can provide.
So your team on ground is currently working hard to give the best service that they can. But since we have the blockade by the Israeli government to allow humanitarian aid or any supplies to go into Gaza, then how do you, the agency at the HQ, do you communicate or you try to supply things through those on the ground? What was the strategy?
So the blockade since the 2nd of March doesn't only affect UNRWA as an agency, it affects the entire UN system. Very little aid in terms of food is allowed to come in by the Israelis. I believe that the World Food Programme is able to bring in a bit of food, but it's nothing compared with the means. We've got 6,000 trucks stuck outside Gaza, in Egypt, in Jordan, in various corridors, waiting to come in with food and with supplies that is at risk of expiring or getting spoiled. But what we've done is, essentially, we no longer rely on supply-driven services, but we do what we were set up to do, which is to provide direct basic services to the population. Now, of course, people are starving, and the mechanism that has been put into place to substitute the traditional aid delivery set up by the UN, so this mechanism being through the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, is clearly not working. So people are being left with no food at all, or very little food, and are always at risk when collecting the food of being shot. As you know, hundreds of people have lost their lives trying to get the food. This is a situation which is outrageous because it's not in line with the humanitarian principles.
And again, about facilities that is under the supervision of UNRWA in Gaza. I think a lot of it have been damaged, as we mentioned earlier, but then UN logo itself is such a sacred logo which people think it is logo of safety, logo where they can take shelter so that they can keep their family safe. But then, as we reported, a lot of Israeli attack now targeting specifically UN and UNRWA facilities. What do you have to say about that? Do you engage with Israeli governments or through any other country so that we can keep that logo as sacred as it should be?
Yes, so I think the sacredness of the logo has completely disappeared during this war. Unfortunately, hundreds of people have been killed on our premises. It means very little. Even wars have rules. And, in addition to the privileges and immunities that the UN benefits from in terms of its premises, there are also elements of proportionality and distinction that have not been applied here by the parties to the conflict. Every time, you said we have control of our premises. I have to tell you that we lost control of many of our premises. So we do not know, and this is since the beginning of the war. With the evacuation orders, we do not know necessarily what's happening in some of our premises, especially in the north and in Gaza City. With hundreds of people having been killed, every time that we have we encounter such an incident, we protest. Right? We've written countless numbers of letters to the Israeli authorities, but we don't get a reply because, as you may know, there's a no-contact now policy under the Knesset laws that were passed at the beginning of the year. We don't get a reply.
Other than facilities under UNRWA supervision, there's also an issue of refugee camps. And there are few orders given out by the Israeli government to relocate all these refugees to other places. So the question about refugee camps, especially one of it is the demolition order for 100 buildings in Tulkarem refugee camp.
In the West Bank?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, it's quite a big issue, even though it's not in Gaza. We have been talking about Gaza since the beginning, but then West Bank also affected by this orders.
Absolutely. So again, you know, UNRWA has a large footprint there. We've got over 3,000 employees working in the West Bank. Now, since the 21st of January, the Israelis have been conducting this wide-scale military operation called the Iron Wall, particularly in 3 camps that you mentioned. So Nur Hasham, Tulkarem, and Jenin camps, leading to the displacement of more than 40,000 Palestine refugees. We, as an agency, we operate 96 schools directly in the West Bank, but 10 of these schools are in these camps, which are now depopulated because of forced evacuation and displacement orders. It is worrying, and we have done all we can to either provide online education to the children, because we're talking about 4,600 kids, I think, out of school there. So online education, or or provide social services, which is like cash-based assistance. We track the number of displaced people, and some of them may be able to attend other schools. This is what we've done. But this is the largest operation since the second Intifada in the 2000s.
I want to move on to, again, about the core mandate of UNRWA, which is, as you mentioned, it's a mini-state, which do a lot of work other than humanitarian aid. And then there's an issue about funding for UNRWA during the first early days of President Donald Trump administration in the White House. He threatened to cut fundings for WHO, UNRWA, and other UN agencies. So I want to give this space for you to give understanding to those who are watching us now that UNRWA need those fundings. Those fundings are critical, not just for food aid, but also others aid that need to be given to all these refugees. Absolutely.
I think your description of UNRWA as a mini-state is very apt. It's very relevant because we provide the services that a state would provide, but we do that in the absence of a state. As I said at the beginning, UNRWA was set up as a temporary agency. It was not meant to last that long. It was set up pending a just and lasting solution to the Palestinian issue. With the years, we substituted a state. This is what we've been doing. And so in order to do that, it's not like other UN agencies where you have a project, and if you don't get the funding, you can just maybe reduce or cut the project. Here, we're talking providing education to children and basic health services directly to the population. If you don't have the funding, what do you cut? Which school do you cut? Which grades do you cut? Which medical services do you choose not to provide anymore? Our funding, contrary to other international organizations, UN agencies, it goes directly to mostly pay the salaries of nurses, doctors, teachers, school staff, sanitation laborers who provide these services. So the funding is critical for us, and there's hardly any overheads. If I want to say this to people who provide funding to UNRWA, you can be sure that it goes directly to benefit the people in terms of the services that we provide. And so we need to continue to get this funding, especially as our mandate is coming up for renewal. For next year, the discussions will be held at the General Assembly this year, and there has been a strategic assessment that has been commissioned by the Secretary General, which looks into the way that UNRWA has been exercising and implementing its mandate amidst the constraints that we face, which are financial, political, operational. And the purpose of the strategic assessment is to set the ground for discussions with the member states at the level of the GA on the future of UNRWA, but also the future of the Palestine question, which is intrinsically linked to UNRWA as well. Our position is not tenable. How long are we still going to provide or act like a state when we are a UN agency?
I think last week our Prime Minister met with President Emmanuel Macron in France, and both of them voiced out the very strong commitment toward peace in Gaza. Now, you mentioned just now there would be an assessment of how UNRWA will work, especially on funding. Does the voice from France give weight to the urgency so that UNRWA can properly work on the ground, not just in Gaza, but on other countries where it provides assistance? So
there's been a number of political tracks that have been happening lately. There is the Global Alliance for the Implementation of the Two-State Solution, which is an initiative led by the Saudis, the European Union, and the League of Arab States, and UNRWA has been part of it, which is to map out what a two-state solution, would look like, and how UNRWA would then hand over its services to an empowered Palestinian state or empowered institutions. In parallel to that, France, together with the Saudis, had scheduled to have to stage an international peace conference in June in New York. This has been postponed to the high-level week, possibly in September, in New York, along with, and it will precede the discussions on the renewal of the mandate of UNRWA. That strategic assessment, which is now out, distributed to the member states through the President of the General Assembly, is, as I said, a platform from which the member states will be able to see what are the options. Because the worst that could happen is a simple rubber stamping renewal of the mandate of UNRWA, but without the financial means for us to continue to work, without a political context within which we could transition, without a proper discussion on the way in which we are able to work or not, particularly in the occupied Palestinian territory, given the constraints by Israel. In Lebanon, in Syria, and Jordan, where we have also a large footprint, we do work without any limitation.
Can you give us a little bit of what is the current state of UNRWA funding? Do you have enough? Do you have the same amount as last year? Does it reduce since what's been said by President Trump? Or what's the current state of funding?
Of course, we lost the US funding. We also lost Sweden. Something very interesting has been happening here during the war, and it's the following. And when states, we faced some accusations and some allegations last year, and we take every allegation very seriously of breaches of neutrality and the purported involvement of our staff in the 7th of October dreadful attacks. And investigations were done. We never received any cogent evidence from the Israelis. Every time an allegation is made, we look into it. But because of the allegations, at the time we lost funding from 16 countries who came back, except the US and later on Sweden. The US has not come back, will not come back. It's a major gap. To your question, we do not have financial visibility beyond August, and the gap is 200 million. So our pledge is to go to the member states with whom we have multi-year agreements, and for them to front-load the money or to disperse in one go rather than in tranche, so that we can stay afloat. And we need to stay afloat for two reasons. One, we have important discussions coming up at the level of the GA, but two, people need us. As I said, we have 33,000 employees, 33,000. They are Palestinian. Only 200 are, like me, international. They are Palestinian, and they are providing basic services to the Palestinians, refugees in the countries and fields where we work. But the interesting part that happened is that when countries lowered their contributions, the private sector and private individuals, particularly here in this country as well, and that's why I'm here as well today, stepped up their contribution. And so in 2024, we had a record of 282 million from the private sector and private individuals who stepped up, but that is not enough. Our budget is 880 million, and we fall short of 200 million to end the year.
You mentioned just now, among other things that UNRWA want to achieve is to give a state of Palestine itself to govern themselves rather than UNRWA is taking up that responsibility as a mini-state. Is that the only long-term vision that UNRWA have?
So that wouldn't be that's not our mandate.
Okay.
So our mandate is just to deliver services in the absence of a long-lasting, fair solution to the plight of Palestine refugees. But we call on member states. That would be a decision of member states, in the same way that the member states decided 1 year before UNRWA was created that the Palestine refugees, through Resolution 194 in the General Assembly, would have a right of return or compensation in the alternative. That has never been implemented. A solution was never found. It is not up to UNRWA, certainly not, to have, we're apolitical. We've been politicized, but we're apolitical. We just deliver services, and we deliver them in situations which are extremely difficult to work in. But the member states have to gather, and we're calling on leadership there to finally find a solution to this problem, because whether UNRWA exists or not, the rights of refugees stand. The right to self-determination, the right of return or compensation, and they have rights also to education, health, and other services, which, in the absence of a state or national institutions providing these services, UNRWA has been asked to step in.
It's been 18 years since UNRWA has been doing their works based on their core mandates, waiting for years and years to time where Palestinians can have their own government, their own states, right to self-determination. Do you optimist that that mandate will end soon? Looking at what's happening now in terms of support, not coming just from Muslim countries, but also the Western countries, the European countries. But then again, because for Malaysians, they see that Muslim countries, especially those who are part of OIC, are not working hard enough in order for issues in Palestine to settle. But for you, as an agency of United Nations, how optimistic is it that this issue can be done and settled as soon as possible?
Well, first of all, you can never lose hope. You can't lose hope, because you've got to continue working. But here, this is my first time in Malaysia, and I'm really humbled to see, the support that we're getting and how committed and knowledgeable the people of Malaysia, the Malaysians are and have been and are committed to supporting UNRWA, but through UNRWA, Palestine refugees, through their call. So I'd like to say thank you very much to start with, to the country and to the leadership that the country has shown across the years. And in particular, yesterday I had the occasion to meet Tun Dr. Mahathir, and it was such an inspiring moment, because this is a man of decades of principled leadership. But back to your question, I have some optimism because of this strategic assessment, which will hopefully put on the table, in a way, force the member states to have a discussion. And I hope they will be bold enough to say, okay, let's have a discussion. Even just that would be success for us, to discuss what is the future of UNRWA, and the way for us to transition out would be part of a political horizon or solution. It may take years, but during these years, we need to continue to work for an orderly transition. The one thing I did not mention is the fact that we are the custodian of all the refugee files. From 1948, the registration of all the refugees, where they came from, their family, the descendants, all these documents are a testament to who is a refugee. And this is critical for final status negotiations. And if a solution was ever found, then either determine who has the right to return or who has the right to compensation.
You mentioned just now, one is UNRWA is a political entities, and then I've watched one of your message during your work in UNDP. You encourage youth so that they can step up in whatever they want to do. And then number 3 is youth actually contribute quite a lot to awareness of what's happening in Gaza and Palestine. So would you take this forum, this space, to give some message to youth who are watching us right now, what they can do in order for them to support UNRWA works? Because just now you mentioned about how countries, if they can sit and talk, there's quite a success. Can youth also contribute to that success?
You refer to my time when I used to work for UNDP, and it's true, we had a lot of youth programs. Look, youth make up the vast majority of the population in Gaza. So I think the youth across the world, in Malaysia and elsewhere, should be able to relate. And to the youth, I would say, put yourself in the shoes. Imagine you're in Gaza today. You've got no prospect. All the institutions have been destroyed. You've got no university. You had a dream of becoming a doctor or a teacher, and you cannot even study. All you have all day is the sirens and the bombs, and your families and your homes are being decimated and destroyed. where do you think your future lies? So I think the youth have an important voice to say, look, to mobilize themselves to say, this is not what I want for the youth of this territory or this country, and to say we need to mobilize ourselves and continue the advocacy for a ceasefire, for the return of the hostages, for peace to prevail. But in the meantime, also for those who provide a modicum of basic services, and this is UNRWA and nobody else, in terms of education, even if it's very little, even if it's online. When we opened our online education modules, at the beginning of the year in January, because our schools were destroyed, 260,000 kids enrolled. Now, that's not to say that they can all day be on their phones and download the material, but the interest was there. And I think this is something that the youth can relate to, because here they have opportunities, but in Gaza they don't anymore. And that will be a lost generation.
Thank you so much, Ms. Boucly, for speaking with us at AWANI. I think at the end of the day, how devastated is the situation, there's always hope. And we must continue our advocacy for the work of humanitarian at large. So that's all for now. Saya Irfan Faruqi, selamat malam.